Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin, a little waddle through all the Penguin classics in my life. We are going today to my guy. Actually, two of my guys. We are going to John Dryden's translation of Virgil's Aeneid from 1697, the doorstep of the 18th century. This is one fragment, one small chunk chopped off a gigantic literary project that Dryden did towards what we now know was the end of his life. He refused to believe it. He had plenty of signs that the end was coming, but he did a gigantic annotated edition of the works of Virgil, the great Roman poet Virgil, all of the works of Virgil. And the centerpiece, the crown of that project was the Aeneid, as he put it, the Aeneid, his translation of Virgil's great poem. Virgil was well connected in the social and political circles surrounding the Roman Emperor Augustus, and was tapped to write a national epic. And he decided that the grandest and best way to do that would be to link it to the greatest epics that he knew, or that any of his readers knew, which were the epics of Homer. And so he has the Trojan warrior Aeneas flee the burning city with his little boy in his hand and his father on his shoulders, and with a complement of men and ships, leave the shores of Troy for a new destiny, to plant a flag in a new country and start a new kingdom in Italy, a kingdom that would become Rome. Virgil decided to write this, and the structure of it laid itself open to what we can call homages to Homer, because the first part of the book is Aeneas and his men wandering, including to the underworld. And then the second part of the book is Aeneas and his men warring as they fight to claw a toehold on the Italian peninsula. So you've got the pattern of the Iliad and the Odyssey a little bit inverted there. You've got the wanderings of the Odyssey at the beginning and the warfare of the Iliad at the end. Right from the beginning, right there on the Aventine, there were critics in Virgil's day who said this isn't much other than style. The style is so great that it's virtually supernatural. But if you take that away, there's not much else here. And later critics, one in particular, very famously said, if you take away his style, what is Virgil? What is left to Virgil? I believe these criticisms have in common the idea that there is none of the primitive but yet stunningly effective personal insight that's all through Homer. He doesn't get the credit for it that he deserves, but it's all through. Homer understands the human nature as well as Shakespeare. And there wasn't much that was human about Virgil, Virgilius Maro. There wasn't much that was human about him. And as much as I think that criticism of style is underselling this book, there's precious little human in this book. There are little bits and pieces here and there, and one extended bit, which we're going to read. But mostly, this is just stunning and stately. And I know that John Dryden is forgotten now, but stunning and stately were not his métier. They weren't his register at all. And yet he took on this job, not necessarily as a national thing of any kind, but because big literary editions, big annotated editions that sold well were the rage, and big stellar translations were also very popular at the time. And his was really popular, really, really popular. No less a figure than Alexander Pope said that it was not only the best translation of Virgil, but the best translation of anything that had ever been made. And no harder a critic to satisfy than Samuel Johnson also sang Dryden's praises to the sky, as someone who literally reinvented the language and the way we think. And Johnson was fond of hyperbole to sell books, but he was right. Dryden doesn't get any credit for doing either one of those things, but it's true. He did it. He reinvented a lot. There's English literature before Dryden and after Dryden. That dividing line really does exist. I know people like to say Shakespeare or even Chaucer, but it's only because they haven't encountered Dryden anymore. You don't encounter Dryden in school. You're not taught him anymore, so you don't know. He changed everything. not just the self-consciousness of English, not just the poise and polish of it, but also the marketability of it and the acceptability of it being marketed. He did that not only for all of his commercial literary projects, including the collected works of Virgil, but also for my own profession, which was built almost from scratch by this one man, this one insufferable ninny. And his translation of the Aeneid has had many, many different editions throughout the year. We will get to them in library tours in this room. His translation of the Aeneid has had many, many different editions, and Penguin decided to make one of their own. So Penguin does a selected poetry of John Dryden. It's very, very miserly. The works of John Dryden, the great works of John Dryden in a Penguin Classic, which would be 1,000 pages. I always harp on this, but Penguin Classic found it permissible to do a 1,300-page volume of the Domesday Book, which is not even a work of literature. But so I know they can do it. I know they have the printing press capability to do it. They could do a gigantic volume of Dryden, and they don't, because who would buy it? I would, but other than that, who would buy it? But for centuries, editors have prized the Aeneid out of that collected works and published it on its own. It's a shame, because Dryden's work on a lot of the rest of it is really good too. But the reason for it is obvious, which is that Dryden's whole vision of what poetry is and does and should sound like is gone. Completely gone. It died in 1959, and I doubt it's ever coming back. For the main reason that the main reason is that the collected ear of the whatever remains of the poetry reading public has been trained elsewhere. But also because this takes skill to do, lots of skill to do. And poets today are the laziest kinds of writers. They are even lazier than AI, which isn't even human. But anyway, Dryden decided to write this thing in his own way, in iambic pentameter with rhymed couplets. Every once in a while, he will break out of iambic pentameter. But this is very much a Dryden production. And it raises all sorts of fascinating questions about what translation is and does. Of course, I was talking about translation recently on this channel, and Greg, in another Bibliophile Reads, pointed out that if you have read something in translation and not in the original, you can't literally say that you've read the book. I agree with that completely. As many times as I have read and reviewed and recommended different English language translations of The Tale of Genji or Tolstoy or the Russians just in general, I have not read the works. And that raises questions about what translation should and shouldn't do. There are two schools, generally speaking. One is that your translation should be absolutely as accurate as possible to the original, even to the point of almost incomprehensibility. If you literally translated 10 lines of Virgil, it wouldn't work in English. You would be able to roughly make out what they were saying, but it would sound like gibberish. That's one school. And the other school is to take the original work and literally translate it into your own language. Not just the words, but the sentiment, the feel, the world. And Dryden very much does the second. So I have already read you on this channel years ago, but there's no harm in repeating, because I don't expect anyone to look through 9,000 videos. I've already read you the famous beginning. The Aeneid has a famous beginning. The invocation to the muse of the Aeneid is famous. And we did a whole bunch of different Virgils, and I read you a whole bunch of different versions of this invocation. I want to read you the invocation again, then we'll read something else. This is how Dryden starts the book. Arms and the man I sing, who forced by fate and haughty Juno's unrelenting hate, expelled and exiled left the Trojan shore. Long labors both by sea and land he bore, and in doubtful war, before he won the Latian realm and built the destined town, his banished gods restored to rights divine, and settled sure succession in his line, from whence the race of Alban fathers come, and the long glories of majestic Rome. So there are a lot of soft rhymes there. There's a lot of that is not the best example of what Dryden can do with end rhymes by a long shot. What have we got here? Hate and fate, sure. Shore and bore here, but one and town. Even in Dryden's day, those didn't sound the same. And also come and Rome. even in Dryden's day, except for the lower parts of town that he never went to. Those didn't sound the same. So you can see already that is not Virgil. Not to echo a famous comment that was made, Alexander Pope, of course, imitated a lot of the beauties of what Dryden was doing with his Aeneid when it came time for him to do his Iliad and Odyssey. And the famous quote, the famous put down was said to Pope that it's very lovely stuff, Mr. Pope, but of course you mustn't call it Homer. Which has got to rankle if you're working years to make sure that you're as close as you can get in the poetic diction of your day. But I want to read you a slightly longer passage that I think is slightly stronger in terms of Dryden's craft, and also that touches on one of the very few human moments in the Aeneid. There aren't many. It very seldom occurs to Virgil to invest his characters with the interiority that everybody gets in the Iliad, for instance. A character who's introduced in one line and 10 lines later gets a spear through the throat and his armor rattled upon him. Even a character like that, who's there 1 minute and gone the next. Homer invests them with a three-dimensional reality. That's what makes the Iliad so exhaustingly cathartic, is that there aren't any faceless deaths. You cannot escape the tragedy and horror of what's going on. You can't escape it. It's very easy to do. It's very easy to escape the horror in Virgil. And I'm not going to read you warfare scenes, but I want to read you a bit of a moment in the poem that is very human. When Aeneas encounters Queen Dido. And they, I guess you could say, they love each other. Certainly they do something in a cave on a rainy day, but she certainly loves him. And he cannot stay. He is impelled on by his fate. He knows what his fate is, and it's not for him to become king of Dido's realm. So despite what his heart thinks, he has to move on. And that is done well. That whole bit is done well in Virgil. Nothing like that ever happened to Virgil himself. Virgil himself never felt anything like the passions that run through Horace or Catullus. So it would have been a feat for him to simulate them, and I think he does a fairly good job. And in this particular instance, I'm going to read you from the beginning of book 4. In this particular instance, he is aided by John Dryden, who barely got out of bed in the morning without having felt some upheaval of passion. So let's read a little about the conflict in the bosom of Queen Dido. But anxious cares already seized the queen. She fed within her veins of flame unseen. The hero's valor, acts, and birth inspire her soul with love and fan the secret fire. His words, his looks, imprinted in her heart, improve the passion and increase the smart. Now when the purple morn had chased away the dewy shadows and restored the day, her sister first, with early care she sought, and thus in mournful accents eased her thought. My dearest Anna, what new dreams affright my laboring soul, what visions of the night disturb my quiet and distract my breast with strange ideas of our Trojan guest. She's been dreaming of Aeneas, because he's dreamy. His worth, his actions, and majestic air, a man descended from the gods, declare. Fear ever argues a degenerate kind. His birth is well asserted by his mind. Then what he suffered, when by fate betrayed, what brave attempts for falling Troy he made, such were his looks, so gracefully he spoke, that were I not resolved against the yoke of hapless marriage, ne'er to be cursed with second love, so fatal was my first, to this one error I might yield again. For since Zacchaeus was untimely slain, this only man is able to subvert the fixed foundations of my stubborn heart. Our first stumble, subvert and heart. The rest of it, though, grand as could be. And what Dido is saying here is that she's already lost a husband and does not want to suffer that pain again. And to confess my frailty to my shame, somewhat I find within, if not the same, too like the sparkles of my former flame. So she's confessing to her sister that not only, notice how many times Aeneas' looks come up, even in that one passage. She's confessing to her sister not only that she feels an impulse towards love, like she did with her first husband, but also that the impulse is as strong. that it's not an echo of that former bond. It's as strong or stronger. So we have a human conflict here. Very good, very well done all throughout Book 4. And there are a couple of other moments. The trip to the underworld, the aforementioned trip to the underworld, is good. There's a moment at the end of the warfare part that you'd have to be a stone on the road to misdo. And Dryden doesn't misdo it. Even Virgil doesn't misdo it. So that is our book for today. It's not just Virgil's Aeneid, which would be, as we mentioned about translations, that would be task enough. Because if you can't read Virgil, then you're reading a translation. Some translators in the way. They might be working hard to get out of your way, but they're still there. They're still in the mix. This is even more than that, because this is a translator who wants to change the way it sounds into the way poetry sounds in his own day. So, and Dryden does a whole lot of that in the course of his Aeneid, with all the paraphrases that were so popular in the early 18th century, that fish are the finny tribe, birds are the brothers of a feather, or whatever, which those circumlocutions were really helpful in translations, especially of uncooperative original verse, by giving you all sorts of leeway for rhymes. But Virgil would not have recognized that as his own. If somehow you could bring him up to speed or get him on the same language page as that, he would say, no, it's not just that my rhythm is completely different. It's that this poet is trying to do things that I would not have done. He's making my poem into a series of ditties. I'm sure it would have been Virgil's idea, that there are poets who do this sort of thing. They're constantly asking me for money, but I don't do that sort of thing. And here you get the whole of the Aeneid like that. It's just a question of, how flexible you are as a reader, especially if you have no Latin. So that is your penguin for today. Sorry, this went long. They won't all go long. But if ever it's going to go long, it's a dead Roman and John Dryden. We'll try to be shorter next time. But that is your daily penguin for today. The Aeneid of John Dryden, his translation of the great Roman epic. So I'll wrap this up and we will continue next time. Thank you, BookTube.